I really think Sam is just a great filmmaker, and he really displays that in this movie. I mean, he didn't just like, oh, make a better film. Oh, this is better than the first one. I mean, he whooped the first one's ass.
That was the teaser for Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2 is not only my favorite superhero movie, but my favorite film of all time. It's hard talking about your favorite film of all time, trying to put into words how it means so much, trying to share why it means so much. It's personal. This is personal. So, where do we start? It looks at me every day. My plans for Spider-Man 4. Oh boy, if Sam only knew how I felt about him. But he can never know. He made a choice once to not come back for the fourth film. A Spider-Man film he will never be a part of. Who am I? You ever have those childhood favorites? Favorite food when you were 4, favorite book when you were 14. Now, how many of those childhood favorites are still your favorites? How many of those hold up? My favorite movie when I was 5 was, yeah, you guessed it, Spider-Man 2. It's one of the few things, one of the few moments that I vividly remember experiencing at such a young age. My parents took me to the Waterworks Theater, this theater. I remember the smell of popcorn and the feeling of excitement. I had watched the first film on VHS every day for the last year. Waterworks had some dude dressed as Spider-Man hanging out in the theater, or maybe some dude decided to dress like Spider-Man. Either way, I thought he was Spider-Man. Imagine that, being a 5-year-old boy whose dad taught him to read with Spider-Man, watching Spider-Man 2 with Spider-Man. 2 hours and 7 minutes later, and I was a changed man, a changed kid. I never saw a movie like that. I never had an experience like that. Believe it or not, I think 5-year-old me understood the power of Spider-Man after those 2 hours. I think he understood the power of film. God, that's pretentious. But hey, I specifically remember something my dad said to me as the credits were rolling.
That wasn't just a good superhero movie, that was a great movie.
I thought about that the entire car ride home. What is a great movie? What made a great movie? I didn't know the answer at the time, but that answer was Spider-Man 2. Spider-Man 2 was my childhood favorite. Childhood favorites are always scary to revisit. What if they don't hold up? What if what was cool when you were 5 isn't as cool when you're 20? I revisit my childhood favorite every year, and every year, it gets better. Here's why.
Go, Spidey, go!
Upping the ante. It's a miracle that this movie exists. Is that a tad hyperbolic? No, not at all. Hear me out on this one. Spider-Man was released on May 3rd, 2002 and made $114,844,116 its opening weekend, making it, at the time, the largest opening weekend of all time. In Hollywood, if you direct a film that makes that much money opening weekend, you're pretty much a god. So instead of celebrating like a god, instead of partying like the fucking rock star he was, Sam Raimi got to work on the sequel.
He really never stopped. We released the first movie and went right into the development and production of the second one, so it wasn't like I actually had a week off. I don't think Sam had a day off.
Not only did Sam Raimi have to top himself, top the instantly iconic first film, he had to find a way to progress the story, progress the characters, and progress the filmmaking in a way that felt true to the ideas and heart of that first film. And he did. Everything Sam Raimi did in Spider-Man 1, he does better in Spider-Man 2. From the beautiful Alex Ross opening credits that recap the first film and make this one feel like a grand freaking event, to the performances of the actors, to the screen.
All alone upon a prairie, brightest green were all her garments, and her hair was like the sunshine. Day by day he gazed upon her.
Screenplay. God, I love this screenplay. I love the poetic lines.
I'm not an empty seat anymore. I'm different. Punch me, I bleed.
I love how melancholy the whole thing is. I love the parallels to the first film that tell us things about Peter's character and his growth. I love how everything is in service of Peter's growth and Peter's character. I love how serious it treats its characters and how confident it is in its themes. I love it. I love this screenplay. Come on, people. What other superhero movies are written by Oscar-winning screenwriters?
I understand.
Alvin Sargent's screenplay for Spider-Man 2, like Kep's Spider-Man 1 screenplay, keeps the plot simple, perhaps even simpler than the first film. Our protagonist, Peter Parker, has to learn to live with the responsibility of being Spider-Man while stopping Doc Ock. It's a classic Spider-Man tale. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but keeping things simple is what allows for complexity. If your plot is simple, if you don't have to constantly explain your plot to the audience through pages of exposition, that gives you more freedom to explore the complexity of the characters. If your story is simple, that gives you more freedom to implement complex filmmaking. Spider-Man 2's screenplay asks a very complex question. Why? Why would Peter Parker want to be Spider-Man when being Spider-Man is actively destroying his life? The first hour of the movie demonstrates this. Peter's life fucking sucks. MJ is sick of waiting around for him. Aunt May can't afford to keep her home. Harry is resentful of Spider-Man and by extension Peter for taking pictures of Spider-Man. He's failing at school. He fails at his pizza delivery job, which means the only way he can make money is by giving Jameson photos of himself that Jameson then uses to slander his name and reputation. Think about that for a second. The only way for this guy to pay his bills is to help this madman ruin his image. Every positive thing Spider-Man does results in a negative for Peter Parker.
No one will be seated after the doors are closed.
Every life Spider-Man saves results in a worse life for Peter Parker.
Joe's 29-minute guarantee is a promise, man. I know to you, Parker, a promise means nothing.
Peter tries his best to be active to change his life, but Spider-Man's life won't allow him to. Spider-Man may be the hero of New York City, but Peter is a depressed nobody who is losing the last positive and human connections he has. All this negativity comes to a head during John Jameson's party, or what I like to call the worst night of Peter Parker's life. In 5 minutes, our hero gets pushed around by Jameson, slapped by his best friend, and comes to the realization that the man Mary Jane has been dating is J. Jonah Jameson's son. John Jameson is a charming, successful, and handsome astronaut, pretty much the opposite of our boy Peter Parker. Peter desperately tries to reach MJ, but she's sick of his shit. Wouldn't you be? Come on. After she poured her heart out to him and told him that she was madly in love with him, after she goddamn told him he made her feel more like herself than anybody ever has, he friend-zoned her and left her alone. Alone at Norman's funeral, and just alone. These movies are very much from Peter's perspective, so of course we think MJ is being a bit of a jerk towards him, but if you think about it, Peter has been just as bad, if not worse. Mary Jane's life and career are thriving, her face is everywhere, she's even the lead in a successful play. She managed to make her dreams come true without Peter. And when MJ tries to share herself with Peter, which she constantly does, when she tries to connect with Peter, he can't be honest with her.
Do you want to say something?
The two kids connecting in the backyard has become two adults unable to connect.
Was wondering if you're still in the village.
It's not really his fault, it's Spider-Man's fault, like everything else that's wrong with his life.
I wish I could tell you how I feel about you.
He can't tell MJ the truth. That would be selfish of him, or maybe it's selfish of him not to tell her. I don't know. We don't know. Peter doesn't fucking know. He doesn't know how to communicate with her, so the best he can do is...
I've been reading poetry lately.
Whatever that means.
But like I said, she's sick of Peter, sick of empty promises, sick of him being nothing to her but an
empty seat.
He heads back into this shit show of a party looking like he has lost all hope, only to have...
Pisses me off your loyalty to Spider-Man and not to your best friend.
Spider-Man has once again ruined another part of Peter's life.
You stole my father's love. And then you let him die because he didn't turn in the freak. Isn't that right?
His best friend who protected him in high school now wants nothing to do with him.
Huh? Isn't that right? Huh, brother?
All because of Spider-Man. And to make things even worse, if that's even possible at this point, Mary Jane, probably due to her talk with Peter, has now
just agreed to marry me.
This is Peter Parker's breaking point. Or maybe the fact that he has to take a photograph of this moment is his breaking point. Five minutes of film, which is around 5 pages of screenplay. 5 minutes of Peter getting his heart slowly ripped out of his chest because of his actions as Spider-Man. So let me ask you again. Why would Peter Parker want to be Spider-Man? The answer is, he wouldn't. He swings away from the party. Remember when swinging high above the streets provided him with a sense of exhilaration and freedom? But not this time. This swinging sequence is sad. This doesn't bring him joy anymore. Putting on the costume only brings him pain, which is why...
Oh no. No! Ah!
His powers stop working. That's why after witnessing one of his idols lose his wife and turn into a monster, that's why after constantly disappointing everyone in his life, that's why after going to this beatdown, he loses his will to be Spider-Man and loses his will to live up to Uncle Ben's ideals. Now this scene right here, I could do an entire video on this one scene, but instead I'll just turn to a section of this mess of a video. Hold on.
All the things you've been thinking about, Peter, make me sad.
Uncle Ben. Fun fact, if you search Uncle Ben on YouTube, one of the videos that pops up is a video I uploaded on my old channel I had when I was a prepubescent lad. That video is, yeah, it's this scene. My young scrawny ass was so profoundly affected by this scene that I felt the need to torrent the movie, take it into Windows Movie Maker, edit just this scene, and then upload it to the masses on my parents' slow-ass internet. Now I realize there was a reason for that. Peter Parker has given up. He doesn't want to, but he can't not be Spider-Man until facing the reason he is Spider-Man.
Peter, all the times we've talked of honesty, fairness, justice, all of those times I counted on you to have the courage to take those dreams out into the world.
I can't live your dreams anymore. I want a life of my own.
I cry every time I watch this scene. Call me a soy boy, call me a crybaby, call me whatever you want, but this gets to me. Not because of how well filmed it is, not because it takes us back to the last time Pete ever got the chance to have a conversation with Ben, but because of this moment right here.
Take my hand, son.
Look at the look on Ben's face. He's heartbroken.
No, Uncle Ben. I'm just Peter Parker.
Well, if you think about it, it isn't Ben who is heartbroken. After all, Peter is talking to himself. He's coming to terms with what he desires versus what he thinks is right. In order to not be Spider-Man, Peter has to let go of Uncle Ben. He has to kill that part of himself driven by Ben, driven by responsibility, in order to be happy. It's the ultimate man versus self scene, and it's genuinely heartbreaking. I remember crying my eyes out when Raimi recreated this iconic image. I thought that was it. I thought the movie was over. I thought they were fading to black for the last time and Spider-Man was finished.
Raindrops keep falling on my head.
Did Sam just place the saddest scene in the film right next to the funniest montage in a superhero movie? Yeah, he did. And it works beautifully. In fact, all of this is beautifully executed, I'll get to that later, but there would be nothing to execute without a screenplay that isn't afraid to ask this question of why. Spider-Man 2 isn't afraid to be, dare I say it, adult? Sam Raimi is acutely aware of the fact that at the end of the day, Spider-Man and the lessons that come with Spider-Man are geared towards younger viewers, but Sargent and him don't pull any punches in depicting how shitty life can be. Constantly letting people down even if you don't mean to, being broke, struggling to pay rent, supporting your parents who want to support you.
You need it more than I do.
No, I can't take that from
Yes, you can. You can take this money from me. For God's sake, it's not much. Now take it.
Are all a part of being a young adult. It's a realistic fantasy tale about growing up. I just turned 20, and as I ranted on about earlier, Spider-Man 2 has been my favorite movie since I was 5. And as I get older, I find myself relating more and more to Peter's struggles in this film. And that's the beauty of Spider-Man, right? In Roger Ebert's 4-star review of the film, he said this better than I ever could. It wasn't that Spider-Man could swing from skyscrapers that won over his readers. It was that he fretted about his personal problems in the thought balloons above his Spidey face mask. The screenplay and story the film chooses to tell is the embodiment of those thought bubbles.
Counting down the best films of the year, the number 4 film on my list is Spider-Man 2, and I guess I'm amazed as you are that Spidey made my top 10, but this was a really good film. The best superhero movie ever made.
Alvin Sargent won an Academy Award for the film Ordinary People, which is ironic considering that the reason Spider-Man 2 works so well is that the most fascinating scenes aren't the action scenes. They are the scenes about ordinary people, about us. Spider-Man 2 is the most human superhero film. Can we just take a moment to appreciate that the film doesn't open on a stylish scene of Spider-Man swinging? It easily could have. Raimi could have ridden the hype wave from the first film and started off with a cool as hell action sequence. But nope, he chooses to open the movie with...
Pizza time.
Do I even need to say anything else? Alright guys, thanks for tuning in. Part 3 will be out in the next 15 years. Bye. The Madman opens the movie with Peter Parker delivering pizzas. If somehow you watched the first movie and didn't think that Raimi got Spider-Man, well, there you go. He, most of the producers, and everyone who worked on the story clearly gets Spider-Man. Spider-Man has never been appealing because he was a cool superhero. He has always been appealing because the panels, the moments, the scenes of him doing something as ordinary as delivering pizzas are just as extraordinary as the scenes of him webbing up bad guys. When I think Spider-Man 2, I don't think about this car getting thrown through the window. I think about the conversation that takes place before. I don't think about New York getting sucked into the sun. I think about our hero using his beliefs to save the day. I don't think about that epic moment of Aunt May hitting Ock in the face.
Shame on you.
I think about a mother telling her son to keep moving forward when he's lost all hope. I think about Peter at his lowest point being reminded that people are still kind.
Would you like a piece of chocolate cake?
Spider-Man 2 is filled with these moments. It's jam-packed with moments of Peter doing laundry and reading poetry, Peter going to the campus doctor to see what's wrong with his spider ass. I live for these moments, I really do. I like to think that the test of a good cape flick is to ask yourself, if I take out the grand action scenes, does the movie still work? Is it still entertaining? Is the character drama enough to carry the film? The answer in this case is, fuck yeah it is. It helps that every action scene in this movie comes from a personal scene. Peter is on the way to MJ's show. Bam! Peter is watching Otto's demonstration. Bam! Peter is at the bank with Aunt May. Bam! Peter is telling MJ he can't be with her. Again. Bam! The action all comes naturally from the character. Even the classic hero versus villain conflict is rooted in emotion and not physicality. Peter in this movie isn't trying to beat Doc Ock. He's trying to save Doc Ock. Is still talked about as not only one of the greatest comic book movie villains of all time, but one of the greatest villains in cinema. And the reason for that is...
Excuse me, you cape shit-loving pretentious pickle-faced brick. Hans Lander, Anton Chigurh, John Doe, Jack Torrance are villains from real cinema. Doc Ock is a bitch.
And the reason for that is, he's not a villain. He's a man controlled by these arms that turns into a monster. Before the arms get hot glued to his body, Otto is charming, smart, kind, someone Peter looks up to and has immense respect for. And he is also someone who represents everything Peter wants.
What I think he sees in Octavius is somebody who's mastered both their gifts. In this case, it's a gift of science, where he can create something for the good of mankind, and a personal life, a loving relationship with his wife. Peter sees this and believes from that experience that it is possible to have both.
Otto is a successful scientist like Norman, but unlike Norman, he also has his personal life together. He's happily married and in love with Rosie, a lovely redhead. Look at the colors of the clothes in this scene. Ock is wearing red, Peter is wearing blue, Spider-Man colors. They even look somewhat alike. Peter hopes to have what Ock has. He desperately wants a life like Otto and Rosie's. He wants that life with Mary Jane. We spend plenty of time seeing Peter's admiration and feeling the happiness of this couple so that this is all the more tragic. That's brutal, and it should be. Ock isn't a likable villain. His villainy isn't all that fun to watch. In fact, it's mostly horrible to watch. I'm gonna let the editor himself explain why this scene is so cool.
Any of the fans who thought that Sam Raimi was a sellout has turned his back on Evil Dead and all the movies that he's excelled at and is known for will finally have to shut their mouths, because it's like full-on Sam Raimi.
There we go. The real villain of the movie is the arms, which I guess you could say represent Ock's hubris and ego. After all, it is Otto's ego that causes the accident that destroys his life.
You sure you could stabilize the fusion reaction?
This is my life's work. I certainly know the consequences of the slightest miscalculation.
The arms just amplify that and take away his conscience, his empathy, and his soul. They take away what makes him Otto and turn him into Doc Ock. Plus, he's just so visually cool. Raimi can use his love of old school horror movies and give us shots like this and just
Nothing will stand in our way. Nothing!
Yes, and to tie Dr. Octopus back to the idea that this is the most human superhero film. In the final fight of the film, which lasts a mere 2 minutes and 40 seconds, the train scene in reality is the final big action piece. Anyways, after those 2 minutes and 40 seconds, Peter doesn't use his fists to beat the bad guy. He doesn't do the typical superhero beatdown we have come to expect. Peter instead uses his admiration of his fallen idol, and he uses his empathy to save the day.
Dr. Octavius. We have to shut it down. Please tell me how.
Peter Parker. Brilliant but lazy.
I adore the fact that Peter uses the words and lessons that both Otto...
You once spoke to me about intelligence. That it was a gift to be used for the good of mankind.
A privilege.
And May taught him in order to get through to Octavius.
It was my dream.
Sometimes, to do what's right, we have to be steady and give up the thing we want the most. Even our dreams.
Fuck, that's so good. Peter uses his empathy to restore Ock's empathy. He doesn't punch him in the face, he essentially helps him get his shit together. And possibly the best thing about this whole ordeal, Spider-Man, the hero, doesn't directly stop New York from getting sucked into the sun. Ock, the villain, is the one who truly saves the day.
I will not die a monster.
This line has always stuck with me. It's tragic. We hear Otto scream as he's being pulled into the river along with his dream. Otto Octavius died believing he was a monster, when in reality, he was the hero who saved New York. Writing this makes me realize how depressing this all sounds. A superhero whose life is the definition of shit, a scientist who died saving the city from his dream, a love interest who is stuck in love with an unreliable Spider-Man. I mean, look at poor John Jameson. The man is the sweetest dude in the world who has a genuine love for Mary Jane, and look what happens to him. The poor bastard is stood up. But what's crazy to me is that none of this seems angsty, none of this seems repetitively grim, and that's because of the This is a good place to pause the video, get something to eat, get something to drink, go smoke a joint, go follow me on Twitter because I'm about to analyze the...
Looks uncomfortable.
It gets kind of itchy. It rides up in the crotch a little bit too.
The filmmaking. Would you believe me if I told you that they started working on Ock's arms way before the script was even finished? Would you believe me if I told you the crew named each of the arms and had separate puppeteers for each arm? Probably not. Nowadays, they would just CG the entire thing, but not back then, not Sam Raimi.
As the director of a picture, the crew is expecting you to know what you're doing and trusting in you to know what you're doing, to lead them. Everyone is really doing the work. It's just that the finished product is more in the director's hands than the other artistic contributors. So the fact that the movie did well made me feel great in the sense that I thought that all the people that worked on the picture for so long and hard must have thought that I had led them well, because the movie turned out okay.
I think that crew was the hardest working crew I've ever seen. And it was because Sam treated them well and treated them with respect, and I think they would have walked across hot coals for him had he requested it.
So much of the film was done practically, practical stunt work, insane sets like this, or this, or even part of the train. The set design is subtle for the most part, but that's what makes it so great. Each set feels crafted by hand and then lived in for 20 years. It adds an element of realism, of groundedness. Peter's apartment is one of my favorite sets ever. You could just look at frames like this and know everything you need to know about Peter. It's grimy, cramped, broken down, much like old Pete himself. This single shot of Peter's closet perfectly summarizes Spider-Man as a character, a man torn between responsibility and living a normal life. A suit, and a Spider-Man suit. Raimi made the switch from cinematographer Don Burgess, who shot Spider-Man 1, as well as classics like Forrest Gump and Castaway, to cinematographer Bill Pope. Pope and Raimi had worked together on Darkman 14 years earlier. Now, my guy Bill Pope loves his harsh shadows, and he loves that golden hour look that we now associate with Spider-Man. Every face in Spider-Man 2 is lit like this, night, day, indoors, outdoors. Because of the way Raimi and Pope like to light the actors, our eyes are almost always drawn to the face. It creates a stylized, almost painting-like look to every frame. The scenes of two people talking are just as visually dynamic as the action scenes. This movie is gorgeous. Spider-Man 2 isn't shot like a standard superhero film, it's shot like an old Hollywood classic mixed with Raimi's insanity. It really is gorgeous, but it's also gorgeous with a purpose. It's not meaningless style, it's not style over substance, the style adds to the substance. The camera in Spider-Man 2 is used to perfectly convey the emotions of the characters, it's used to put us in the heads of the characters. When Peter experiences vertigo, we experience vertigo. When Peter can't see correctly with his glasses, we can't see correctly. When Peter is longing for Mary Jane outside the theater, the camera becomes a longing gaze. MJ doesn't see Peter, literally and metaphorically, so he becomes lost in a crowd of people. When Peter and MJ are talking in the backyard, we start on a wide shot. They are apart. As they move closer to each other and start connecting, the camera moves closer. The shot reverse shot keeps getting closer to their faces.
Oh boy, yeah.
When Mary Jane touches Peter's face, the shot is now an almost extreme close-up. When they can't connect, Raimi slowly moves back from Peter, and then we go back to a wide as Mary Jane tells Peter,
I'm seeing somebody now.
That's visual storytelling. The camera is telling a story by itself. Mute the movie and you can still get a pretty good idea of the emotions the characters are feeling. The tone balancing in Spider-Man 2 is just ridiculous.
Whoa! He stole that guy's pizzas!
Helps maintain the illusion.
I'm in charge here! It's my money!
I truly believe Sam Raimi is unmatched when it comes to balancing his tones while also maintaining some form of tonal consistency. Like I mentioned earlier, Raimi can go from the most heartbreaking scene in the film to this hilarious goof fest and still have the audience feel every emotion he wants you to feel. He can go from J. Jonah Jameson laughing at Peter for what feels like 15 minutes to this tragic villain monologue.
My Rosie's dead. My dream is dead.
I don't know how he does it. I really don't. Maybe it's how well paced his films are. No scene overstays its welcome and no moment feels too short. He lingers on faces when he needs to hold an emotion, and he throws a car through a window before kids can get bored of the romance. The action scenes. Oh boy, the action scenes. The train scene has never been topped, and I'm not just talking about the actual train fight. We need to give more praise to what happens before they even get to the train. We go from this iconic moment that's just a comic book come to life.
I want Spider-Man!
To this powerful swing. that then turns out to be a reflection in Doc Ock's glasses, to this clock tower bit that blends CG and practical effects perfectly, especially considering it was 2004. Raimi does this thing that I love. He always ends a very CG shot on a real element. Take a look at this bit. CG Spider-Man is swinging in a way that a real person could not, and then CG Spider-Man is falling in a way a real person could not. But before a film bro video essay bitch like me can say, that looks so fake, Raimi cuts back to Tobey in costume. He does this wherever and whenever he can. By doing this, Raimi makes violence feel violent. Pretty much none of the action scenes across the entire trilogy feel like two weightless computer-generated characters flailing around. He makes falling down feel impactful. Stuntmen are crazy. Anyways, they then fall on the train, and then they fight on the train, and then the typical hero versus villain fight turns into Peter having to catch these people and then having to catch the fucking train.
You have a train to catch.
The stakes are enormous. All these people will die if Peter can't stop the train. We don't want these people to go flying into the river. We don't want Peter to fail. This isn't iconic because of how expertly filmed it is or how well it balances tone. This is iconic because we care. New York City was so well established in Spider-Man 1, and throughout this film we feel these stakes. These aren't just random extras that the hero has to save. They all feel like characters, like neighbors, like people we know, people Peter knows. They are Peter's fellow New Yorkers. We feel the pure stress of how Peter is feeling in this impossible situation. So when Peter puts his entire being into stopping this train, when he succeeds while reaching his physical breaking point, we are ready for this moment. And here we go, one of my favorite lines in superhero cinema.
He's just a kid. No older than my son.
Peter has been shit on this entire movie because of his life as Spider-Man. But now these people on the train are seeing both sides of Peter. He's unmasked. He's vulnerable. What if one of these schmucks tells the world that Spider-Man is this dorky college kid? What if they decide to screw him over like most people have? What if...
It's all right.
But these people on the train, the community Peter just saved, they are kind. They help remind Peter that the world can be kind, and he needs that right now. Just like how they need him, how we needed him.
These are tough and scary times, and during these times, we always look to stories of heroes to show us the way and to give us hope. And maybe that has something to do with why the audience right now is so taken with Spider-Man.
The best superhero film. There are plenty of great superhero flicks. I've made videos about plenty of great superhero flicks, but not any of them, not a single one of them understands the essence of heroism like Spider-Man 2. Spider-Man 2 takes our beloved hero from the first film and shoves everything against him until he breaks. But it's not about the fall. It's not about a hero reaching his breaking point. Spider-Man 2 is about a hero finding the will to persevere through everything, through his fall, through that breaking point, and choosing to get back up. After all this horrendous shit happens to Peter, after he sees and we see that his life would and could be better if he just hung up the mask, he still chooses to be Spider-Man.
That scene takes place just when Peter Parker has realized that as much as he has given away his outfit, has chased after Mary Jane Watson and promised her that he'd be there, that really he never had a right to make that promise. And that the powers weren't his to give away, and that they're really a gift for everyone.
He still chooses to be Spider-Man after his idol dies. He still chooses to be Spider-Man even though his only friend will hate him. He still chooses to be Spider-Man fully believing that he will never be able to live a happy life with the girl he loves.
I will always be Spider-Man.
Take my hand, son.
You and I can never be.
This is what being a hero is all about. Sacrifice. He sacrifices his happiness to protect Mary Jane and to protect his city. And you can see it, you can feel it, you can feel the heartbreak through his attempt at comforting Mary Jane. Peter is not only breaking his own heart, he's breaking hers again, and he knows it. He knows that she's much better off with a guy like John Jameson who has the ability to be there for her. Mary Jane looks up at Peter and smiles at him, both heartbroken, both trying to comfort each other and do what's right for each other, both now having grown from young adults who couldn't communicate in the backyard to two adults who now have empathy for each other. And then after all these tears and all this heartbreak, Peter still manages to get back up, put on the mask, and be the hero New York City needs, and be the man his uncle wished for him to be. Peter still manages to get back up and be Spider-Man. That gets me every time. Every goddamn time. You could end the film right here. Peter has learned his lesson, completed his arc, and accepted his destiny, his almost sad destiny, as the savior of New York City. But for once, for the first time in his life, Peter Parker gets the happy ending. And of course, Peter is such a great guy that he tries to reject his own happy ending.
You shouldn't be here.
But Mary Jane won't let him. Not this time. She can decide who she wants to be and who she wants to spend her life with.
I love you. So here I am, standing in your doorway. I've always been standing in your doorway.
We have watched our hero sacrifice and suffer for the last 2 hours. And now, he finally gets to be happy.
Isn't it about time somebody saved your life?
Spider-Man 2 is my favorite film because of lines like these. Spider-Man 2 is my favorite film because it uses every bit of its insane budget to engage, thrill, and challenge the audience and challenge the character of Peter Parker. Spider-Man 2 is my favorite film because it's a $200 million studio film that feels 100% Sam Raimi, that feels so personal. Spider-Man 2 is my favorite film first and foremost because it manages to be one of the most human films I have ever seen. If we take away all the cinematic flair, all the insane craftsmanship on display, if we take away all that, what we are left with is an inspirational story about a young man struggling to be a Spider-Man, struggling to be a hero. Spider-Man 2 taught 5-year-old me what it meant to be a hero. It showed me that even though life can and will suck, oh boy, does it sometimes suck, that it's our responsibility to keep moving forward and, most importantly, keep doing the right thing. And that's the true power of cinema. If you can connect with something, if it can teach you something, if it can change your life. Spider-Man 2 changed my life. It inspired me to be a filmmaker. It inspired me to do this. Every time I revisit my childhood favorite, it not only gets better, it makes me want to be better, a better filmmaker, and above all else, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2 makes me want to be a better human being.
She looks at me every day. Mary Jane Watson. Oh boy. If she only knew how I felt about her. But she can never know. I made a choice once to live a life of responsibility. A life she can never be a part of. Who am I? I'm Spider-Man, given a job to do. And I'm Peter Parker. And I too have a job.
Sticks. Robbie, there's your page 1. Masked menace terrorizes town.
So where you been, pal? You don't return my calls.
I've been busy.
Taking pictures of Spider-Man. How's the bug these days?
Peter.
such a mystery.
I think to myself at times, were I to face the one responsible for what happened, I don't know what I'd do.
Gonna make you mad not to know who you are. Your soul disappears. Nothing as bad as uncertainty. Listen, maybe you're not supposed to be Spider-Man climbing those walls. You always have a choice, Peter.
I have a choice.